How's it going, everybody? Greg here with RC Driver, and this is episode number 12 of our Get Into RC video series. Now, for the past few episodes, I've been talking about the part names of all the types of parts that are on the car, so you know what you're talking about. And this episode right here, we're going to talk about nitro and gasoline engine parts. Yes, I'm not going to forget about you gas guys. I'm going to talk about some of that stuff too. So I'm going to go over all the different parts of that, and I think that wraps up all the names of parts. I think I got you pretty much covered. You'll be able to know everything that's really on the car, I think, by watching these series of videos. So let's not wait any longer. Let's get into the nitro and gas side of names of parts, and I'll head over to the workbench to do that.
So this particular area of the car is called the radio tray, and that's because it houses all the radio electronic equipment. So we got the servos, we have the receiver in here, and here's the battery pack, and I'll get into a little bit more detail in a second. So the tray right here, this carbon fiber tray, is called the servo tray, and then there are the radio tray mounts, which are just some posts underneath this tray here. In this particular car, this is where the battery is mounted. So this is the battery mounting plate in this particular car. Sometimes there is a battery box where the battery sits inside. And then back here we have the radio box or the receiver box, and the receiver is inside here as well. On this particular car here is a transponder mount. And I have a electronic switch, but sometimes there is a manual switch that gets mounted to the box. So there are a different number of ways that a radio tray is set up, but this gives you a basic idea of what's going on here. So of course we have the servo horns. We talked about that already. This is what a nitro servo horn would look like. It typically has two ends here. And then these are the throttle linkages here. So we have the brake linkage and we have the throttle linkage here. And so we'll start off with this part here. This is the rod guide. And so these there's three of them on this specific car right here. So we have a rod guide here, rod guide here, rod guide here. Say that 3 times fast. And then we have the rods themselves. Let me just get this filter out of the way. So here you can see the brake linkage rods. They're typically threaded on one end and they run through to the brake assemblies here. So this part of the brake linkage is called a collar, and this particular one is a knurled collar, so you could grab it and turn it to adjust your brake bias. And then over here we have a spring, and then we have another collar. And then back here we have another linkage rod here with a collar and spring, the return spring to help close the carburetor. And then it has a rod end on there that attaches to the carb. Then over here, I don't think I covered this before during drivetrain, but this is the brake arm. We have a brake cam, and then down inside here we have some brake plates. This car has some brake plate separating springs that help push the pads apart so it doesn't drag on the brake disc, which is down inside there on both front and rear of this particular vehicle. All right, while I'm over here, I might as well talk about this dirty air filter. I apologize for that. So this is the air filter wire mount. We have the plastic housing that makes up the air filter frame. It's the air filter cage, air filter frame, and then we have, of course, the air filter. Mostly there's dual element filters, so that means there is a foam sleeve outside of a internal foam filter, and then we have the rubber elbow back here. Okay, now we can talk about the nitro side of the buggy. I'm going to start off here with the fuel tank. So right up top here, this is a fuel tank pull. This particular one is made out of a zip tie and some fuel tubing, but manufacturers are starting to include actual pulls that are molded, which are pretty neat. So this is your fuel tank lid. We have a fuel tank spring, and this is your fuel tank lid pin that runs through here. Now outside we have fuel line clips, and they come in a variety of different styles. This one mounts to the tank. Sometimes they're just clips that pop onto the fuel lines. And just to wrap up parts of the fuel tank here, this is the splash guard of the tank, and this is the drain for overspilt fuel that runs down through the bottom of the chassis. And these little parts right here are called the fuel barb, or sometimes they're called the fuel nipple. There's one at the bottom for the feed, and then this is the pressure barb here. All right, so I've pulled the fuel tank out, and just to go over one more thing, these are the fuel tank grommets here, and then to support the fuel tank, we have the fuel tank posts. All right, now let's move on to the engine stuff here and the pipe. Actually, I'll start off on the pipe side. So this is the pipe hanger wire or pipe wire. It is basically a thick piece of piano wire bent up into an elbow shape. And then we have the pipe mount right here. And then we move on to the tune pipe itself. Sometimes people call it a muffler, but in this particular case, it's pretty much called a tune pipe. This is the stinger of the tune pipe, and this is the pressure barb right here. All right, moving back, this is the coupler area. Most cars nowadays come with this spring style coupler. Older cars may have a rubber coupler here. It's like a rubber pipe but most cars use this nowadays. So it is basically 3 springs that hold the pipe to the header with a rubber gasket in the center. And the header, this is the header, wraps around to the back of the engine, and then there's another gasket here, and then we have a header retention spring, header retainer spring right here. Now I'll just show some external engine stuff. We have the engine mount down here, we have a flywheel and the clutch bell, and we kind of talked about that stuff over in the drivetrain video. Now let's get a little deeper into the engine, and for that I have this old engine that I've cut up. I actually did this a while ago, but it'll help me talk about all the different parts of the engine. So let's start off with the engine case right here. It's kind of obvious. It's the casing that makes up the main body of the engine. We have the exhaust port here, and this up top is the heatsink head, and then we have the glow plug inside there. And there's 2 different types of glow plugs. They have different shapes. There is a turbo glow plug and a standard glow plug. So make sure you purchase the correct glow plug when you need to replace it. All right, let me move over to the back here. So inside the engine here, we have the sleeve, and you kind of see inside. It is the sleeve that runs on the inside of the case, and then we have the piston here, and then we have the wrist pin. You can kind of see it peeking out in there that goes through the piston and attaches to the connecting rod. And you could start to see the crankshaft inside there, and then this is the other end of the crank out here, and then there are ball bearings to support the crankshaft. All right, so moving over to the carb side here, here's a cutaway of the carb. Now this particular carburetor is a barrel carb, and that means it twists forward and aft. And then there are a slide carb style. Most cars have a slide carb style now, and that slides in and out. That barrel slides in and out to adjust the airflow into the engine. So over here we have the carburetor arm, and that's what either slides or rotates the barrel of the carburetor. Over here we have the idle stop screw, and over here we have the fuel inlet bar. And then we have the high-end needle over here. You can see, kind of see it is a needle that adjusts the flow of fuel into the engine there. And we have, again, a fuel nipple on the outside here. And sometimes there is an additional needle over here as well, and that is called your mid-range needle. The one thing I didn't have on the cutaway engine was the different types of backplates. So this is a non-pull start engine, and this is an example of a non-pull start backplate. This is a pull starter assembly here. So we have the handle. Inside we have the cord, and then we have the pull starter casing, and inside here is a recoil spring, and that's what pulls the pull start cord back in once you release it. Now here's a closer look at the backplate assembly of a pull starter type engine, and this will be similar for an electric start type engine as well, and a roto start type engine. So this is the backplate here. This will go on to the back of the engine. As you can see, we have a rubber O-ring gasket here. And then this is the one-way bearing. This is what often goes in pull starter assemblies. So if your pull starter doesn't seem to be working, this is probably the problem right here. And then we have the pull starter shaft. And this is what the one-way bearing rides on. So the only 2 that I don't have an example of are a roto start assembly end cap and a electric starter end cap. Basically, it's a small case with a gear drive inside that would drive this gear, and I would have an output shaft here for a roto start. And then for an electric start assembly, it would have a gear casing with multiple gears inside and an electric motor attached to it. But that gives you a general idea of what a Nitro engine consists of. Finally, we'll wrap up this series with a gas car. Let's start over here really quick. This is a gas car radio tray. It is much similar to a Nitro radio tray, so I won't go over it again. You'll see it's basically got the same layout. The receivers here, we've got servos, we've got the radio tray, and the battery box is back here, and then we've got the linkages. We've gone over that already, so it's pretty much the same here. Then over here we have a gasoline fuel tank. It's a little bit different. It uses different types of fuel tubes and different O-rings inside if there are any. So just be aware that there are different fuel lines. We've got our gas cap over here. Then over here we have an air filter, and air filters are much similar to a Nitro air filter. This particular one is in a case, but again, there's just a large variety of air filters, so depending on what vehicle you have, it might look different. Okay, let me see if I can get over here to the engine. Let's start over here on the front side. So down in here we have the clutch carrier. This is the front part here, and it often mounts to the chassis. The clutch housing is the backside piece here, and then down inside is the clutch bell. There is a gear that typically threads onto the front. You can kind of hear the gear inside of there as I rock it back and forth. This is a gear cover on this particular car. Then inside we have a clutch system. Typically On stock vehicles, there is a 2-shoe clutch in there, and the clutch shoes are mounted to the clutch plate. All right, over here we have the muffler, and sometimes or often guys replace this with a tune pipe so it goes a lot faster. But this is what a stock muffler looks like. Up top here we have the spark plug wire and the spark plug, and then the engine cover shroud right here. And over here, this is the top end of the engine, and then there is a bottom case as well. So typically the engine casing on a gas engine looks much different than a nitro engine. All right, moving over here, here's the carburetor. Again, we have an inlet nipple here. This is the carb choke. So we turn that back and forth to choke the engine for startup. We have the throttle arm. Here is the carburetor manifold in here, and then we have the carburetor itself. Here's the primer bulb up top. So now out back here, we can see the mixture adjusting screws, and then we have the idle screw here. Now this is your kill switch. This is your rear cover to the case. Of course, this is a pull start. I'm sure most of you know that. And then under here, inside here is the flywheel. And then inside here, under this cover, is an ignition coil. And I'm sure you can imagine inside the engine itself, again, we have a crankshaft, we have a connecting rod, we have a wrist pin, and then we have the piston itself.
Well, that wraps up our discussion for nitro and gas car parts. I hope you found a lot of useful information in there. Actually, I hope this whole series of naming parts has helped you out a lot. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, that notifications button, so you get notified when we have more Get Into RC videos coming up. I got a lot more stuff planned, and you're going to want to see it.